So now we're going to turn to Reed v. Reed, which is the first case in which the Berger Court addresses these gender classifications. It's important to note a couple things about this case before we even get into the background. This is the first time that the Supreme Court actually declares invalid a gender-based classification, and this decision by the court comes just a few months after the House voted to approve the Equal Rights Amendment. So the court is very much operating in an environment when it seems very likely that the Equal Rights Amendment is actually going to pass. And I think a lot of what we see here, the nature that it's a unanimous opinion, the language used within the case, is a lot of it a signal from the court that it recognizes the broader sort of social environment in which the case is taking place, how gender-based stereotypes over time have become exceedingly unpopular. And this first case, which we launch into to examine this, uses a gender-based classification that provides very little justification for the reason for this distinction between men and women with regards to the classification that the state of Idaho makes in this case. Because there's no good reasoning and no good state argument about why this distinction should be made outside of convenience and gender stereotypes, it actually doesn't provide a good platform for the court to actually act broadly upon. This is also the first case in which future Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually argues on behalf of the ACLU. And you can see in the text of the decision a lot of Ginsburg's arguments sort of flowing into the text of what Justice Berger writes. So this is a unanimous opinion written by Chief Justice Berger. To provide you a little background to the case, Idaho provided that the state should favor a man over a woman when appointing an administrator of an estate. An administrator of state handles wills and things such as that. The state of Idaho argued that the law was based on simply administrative convenience and the capacity of men to handle these issues over women. So the issue simply was, does this distinction on the basis of Idaho violate the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause? Very quickly, the Supreme Court unanimously rejects these arguments and holds that this law is an unconstitutional violation of the Equal Protection Clause because it's simply arbitrary. While there might be, and there are in some cases, a very good reason for a distinction based on the law between men and women on this issue in terms of who can be an administrator of an estate or administrator of a will. Simply, the state of Idaho offered very bad justifications for why this law in question should survive the 14th Amendment. Now, things that the court doesn't deal with in this case. There was a debate, and we'll see it evolve over these cases, about what level of scrutiny that the court should use in resolving gender-based distinctions under the 14th Amendment. We know from our previous section that race-based distinctions operate under strict scrutiny. And we know that other distinctions operate under rational basis being a much easier barrier for states to reach when laws discriminate different groups on the basis of other resolvable characteristics, and strict scrutiny when cases discriminate on the basis of race. This case does not deal with the level of scrutiny directly because they actually, in this case, apply a rational basis test. This rational basis test is a very, very low bar for states to overcome, and the states could not even overcome it in this case in Reed v. Reed because the states simply couldn't provide a reason. So it doesn't invoke strict scrutiny. It does use rational basis, but there are a number of laws which under a rational basis standard, a number of gender-based distinctions that might survive through the court. And so the court ends up in the future having to wrestle with that issue about what to do between a rational basis test and a strict scrutiny test. And why this may seem at least to be a trivial issue about who can be an executor of a will. lots of laws across the United States, specifically about executors of wills, were in force at this time, and this decision negates all of them. As we said, this is the first case which future Justice Ginsburg argues before the court, and you can see the language that the court adopts coming from Ginsburg's oral arguments. In fact, the quotation that perhaps is most notable in her oral arguments gets read into the decision, and that is this distinction solely on the basis of sex. And that was the outcome that Berger writes in this case, is that's this distinction solely on the basis of sex that has no justification, even that could survive a rational basis type of test going forward, must be struck down. In the next cases, we will see distinctions on the basis of sex as well, but the court begins to wrestle with what sort of standard they should apply to laws that discriminate on this distinction. And that's really where the evolution of these cases go. And the trajectory of that evolution is very much a trajectory that Ruth Bader Ginsburg pushes through all of these cases.